All right, everybody, here we are, and this is Uncle Matt's D&D neighborhood, and guests today are Alex Karaczun. Alex, say hello to everyone.
Hi, everyone.
And Douglas Cole. Say
Good
hello.
evening. Good evening, everyone.
And there's a little bit, and I should also say, please, if you're watching, and if you're watching this live, you've already subscribed to the channel, I'm sure. But if you're watching this and you enjoy little, how to DM tips sort of videos, please subscribe, and also take a look at my Patreon, which is patreon.com/Uncle Matt, all one word. Anyway, the topic that we're going to be talking about is writing a player's guide, and there's a little bit of a story behind this, which is that we did this entire thing as an ambush because I raised the question of what do you put in a player's handbook on Facebook, and Doug and Alex both walked right into the trap and said, "Hey, I could talk about that for a long time," and so I got them on an. I was like, fine, let's get on YouTube, 15 minutes, but that show did not process correctly, and so YouTube just sort of ate it. And so we're going to do it again, and this time I think that we'll probably sound a little more rehearsed, and I may ask some questions that came from the last one. Also, we're going to have we're telling Alex that it's okay to interrupt Douglas. When Douglas starts talking, the man can talk, and so it's like, and if you lose focus for a minute when he's talking about initiative, you may tune in, just a few seconds later, and he's talking about how Vikings interpreted narwhal dancing in the Baltic, and you're like, how did we get there from here?
It's a twisty path.
Yeah. So with that, guys, we're going to talk about writing a player guide. There's a big distinction between writing a player guide for your use at home, DIY, writing something up, as opposed to a publisher writing one where obviously they've got to be giving value for it, and so there's more information coming across. And so both of you guys are from have got lots of RPG industry experience. So toss a little bit of the resume out there so people know why they should listen to you.
I'll let Alex go first.
Oh, well, thank you, Douglas. I was running a company called Mischief Incorporated for a while, and that became Fireborn Games. We published several adventures for Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and just continuing to work in the design space, systems and so forth. So that's where I am at right now, doing kind of freelancing, that sort of thing.
Freelancing, and mostly what you do is first edition Dungeons and Dragons.
Mostly, yes.
Yeah. Okay, and then Douglas.
So I got my.
Hey, you get to show off the thing too.
I wasn't going to, but I will.
Yeah.
So I got my start in 2002 writing articles in Pyramid Magazine with Steve Jackson Games. I was lead playtester on a couple of their books and playtested a lot of their stuff. And they've got great editorial standards and will turn a writer. If you can get past the formatting guide, they'll make a writer out of you. 2 years ago, I started Gaming Ballistic as a company. 5 years ago, I guess I started that as a blog in order to bring Dragon Heresy, which was this shiny new book. These are the advanced copies. There we go. Look at that. All right. Stay on topic.
But no, wait, hold it up for just a second again.
Sure.
Okay, so what this is it's a full role playing game centered around Vikings, and Douglas does Viking martial arts. In fact, teaches them, I think. So that's the book, and so he usually brings a kind of a Viking slant to things. So.
Yeah, and anyway, so I did that, but then I realized that no one would give me $150,000 on my first Kickstarter to do a big 3-volume whatever. So I released a couple other products, kickstarted and funded and got this one, Dragon Heresy, going and also got a license recently to convert one of my other products to the Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game from Steve Jackson Games, and those licenses are few and far between. And that kickstarted and funded and has went to PDF, and I should be getting my print copies in a couple of weeks there too. So I'm kind of fulfilling 2 Kickstarters at once.
Yeah, you really hit it big. Jumped onto the stage, with Viking horns and everything. All right, let's start talking about players' guides. First of all, what's the benefit of a player's guide? So if you're watching this and you're like, well, what are you even talking about? For your basic at-home dungeon, that would probably be, however much background information you give to the players, either for reference or for reading. And so the first question is, what is the benefit of doing that at all? Who wants to grab that one?
I'll jump in.
Okay.
I think that what it does is it gets your players kind of in the in a mindset that where they're prepared for the world to encounter the world. What I always think about when I think about like a home campaign type of player's guide is you want to give them things, you want to point out the things to them that make this world different than what is presented in the main rule books. There's obviously an implied setting that kind of goes with most rule books. And you want to point out those things that are going to be different, because they can read those rule books and kind of get that implied setting. But what have you changed? What have you done to make this your world? So,
okay, so differences. Douglas, what do you think?
Yeah, I think that Alex and I are going to wind up agreeing a lot, as we did in the prior thing. But
yeah, that was one of our big difficulties. I was saying to them, we'll get you guys back and we'll pick a topic y'all disagree on. But okay, go ahead.
So I think it's 2 things. One is it gives the players a sense of place in the world for their characters. These are sort of 2 things, right? These are the things that everyone in the game world will know or do. Whether it's, and we'll get into it more, but whether it's religion or geography or, what they all look like, if it's not your standard Northern European human stuff. But also it's probably a list of things that they won't do. And to pick on the Viking example, no one is going to go and say, "You fool, you worship Thor. He doesn't exist. You need to come worship Loki instead." Right? It's not evangelical, and the people who will do it will smack you upside the head for dissing Thor, so Thor doesn't show up and kick your ass. Kick your butt, sorry. And so it's that
all
kind
right.
of thing.
We abandoned standards of
I know. I tried
long time ago. I think it was the 2nd day of the channel. So
excellent. But I think that's really what it does is it provides, hopefully concisely, shared expectations of what the GM expects the players to know and do.
I've got an interesting question here on the chat room. Someone is saying, off the right shoulder, it is the sweeper of death. Oh, I think that's your
vacuum cleaner.
That's your vacuum cleaner. Okay. So,
which is broken.
Oh no!
Yeah,
it's the dead sweeper of death.
It is literally the sweeper of death.
So I guess my answer to that question about what's the point of the player's guide is very similar to Alex's. It's that you've got to highlight the differences that you're doing. And specifically the differences that have to do with starting a character, are really the ones that I first focus on. And I don't really do a lot of that, because inventing new character classes and things like that, something's always going to go wrong. Deciding that everyone is going to call clerics, Zoomptils. They're going to call them clerics. They're not going to adopt that. But the things that you can, give the players that are important to the first few sessions of their character, I think are generally, for me, the most important things to put in a player's guide. That and a map. A map may come later, but
well, yeah, it depends on how. I would say it depends on how focused you want to get to. One of the things I jotted down was that I think that there's two ways to approach this. You can build it all in great detail, or you can start small with few details and fill it in as you go. I think generally people who kind of say, hey, let's start a campaign, I'm going to put together something, we'll start this weekend. That's the starting small, probably. If you, like me,
one hopes.
well, yeah, if you're like me, I'm kind of in between campaigns. I'm thinking about, DMing for my daughter down the road in probably about 4 or 5 years. That might be the build it all in great detail kind of thing, where I can just sit back and start at the very beginning and build it all out. So that's probably the first decision you want to make too, is how detailed you want to get initially.
And I think go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was going to say, and that also implies a type of campaign too, because if your idea is that you want to do a hex crawl, there's no reason to just begin with a world map either. And so,
right.
Those are two very different styles. The sort of sweeping, there's a place, okay, we go there, as opposed to, we're working our way through, we're exploring, doing the sort of hex crawl thing. Those are two different styles.
Right.
Yeah, and I think the other part of that is it's your player's guide, especially for a do-it-yourself campaign, is going to depend very much on your players, right? I got a campaign background packet from a game master for a game that is going to start on Monday. It was 85 pages long, and he said it was light. This is my light one, and I'm like, okay, I got some reading to do. And if you got a bunch of 45-year-olds with children and day jobs and night jobs, because the only time you can write is late at night or whatever, 85 pages of stuff that I'm expected to know that's a weight. That is a weight of burden on you. That if everyone's into it, yes, I cannot wait to explore this world, and I love reading the fiction of the world and the stories of the gods and whatever, then that's great. But if the shared expectation is getting together after work when you're brain dead and killing some orcs so that you can pretend that they were your vendor or something that did you wrong, that's an entirely different level. That's one page thog crush, right? That's the background, all you need. And so you really need to understand your audience, and your audience is your players, and as well as their expectations for the kind of time that they want to have.
I mean, my experience with players is that even with a commercial player's guide, they are only going to dip into it, look around, stir it with their finger a little, remember one or two things out of it. I think it's a bad idea to write something that's that long and expect the players to be able to digest it at the beginning. Because I mean, my reaction would be, you better be fucking Tolkien if you want me to read 85 pages before the first game.
Right. I think there's a lot of truth to that. And this, I'm not going to go too far to the side, but one of the interesting things about game books is that they kind of have to be written so that they can be read in any order.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that something similar to that. 85 pages seems kind of long, but does the dungeon master expect all players to read all 85 pages of that, or if you're a cleric, can you jump to the gods section and read about your faith, and forget about maybe a deep knowledge of geography or something? You know what I mean? Like, that's important as well. And I think that those sections, if you're going to write something like that, you need to make sure that those sections are clearly delineated, because some people are not going to want to read about politics or or whatever. So there might be whatever the topic may be.
And in fairness to the 85 pages, it was 6 files, each of 10 or 15 pages long.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, but no, I think, Alex, you made a really, really good point there. So let's say that you are a DM and you've got a pretty complex world, and you want to give people a lot of potential hooks into the campaign world. And you've got a lot of various options for them, like you've got, 20 odd deities or something like that. In that case, it might be just fine, because what you're really giving them there is a reference book for the campaign. And a reference book is a lot less onerous to suddenly have somebody go, whomp, here's the thing, because again, as Alex said, if if there are 20 gods that you've written up, but each of them only has one page, and they're a cleric of that one god, then yeah, the 20 pages of deities is not a real big deal. If the way it really comes down to is you open the one page, you know, to your god and you're reading one page, that's something entirely different from expecting people to assimilate all kinds of differences between, you know, the campaign and the next. Players do not like to have to learn stuff as if it's school.
Yeah, and one of the things I jotted down about that particular topic, gods, demigods, quasi-deities, and heroes, you know, I wouldn't even do a page. I don't think. I would do names, spheres of influence, short bit probably on dogma and holy observances, and that's it. It would be quarter of a page maybe per.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that a quick, you know, death to bullet points, but a quick bullet point list of here are the 3 things that your cleric loves. Here are the 3 things that your cleric hates. Right? Here are 3 things that your cleric will always do. And here are 3 things that your cleric will never do. Right? And that really says make sure your player's guide is written to the player. Not, oh, here's all this cool stuff about my world, but this is what you need to know. Not what, you know, I mean, this is what you need to know to be an actor in this world.
Yeah, I think Doug, you used the words like world fiction or something like that. Yeah, I don't want to read a book about your world that's, you know, a story about things. I want quick bits of information that I can use and jot down on my character sheet, just to remind me during a game session of things that I would like to play up.
Right.
Yeah, but I don't want to read a novel. So.
Okay, so we just had Game Master's Vault post, and for also right before that, hey Rocky, the Game Master's Vault has just said I wrote out a 7-page document just on Thieves' Cant, just for the rogue in my campaign. And once again, that's an example of the kind of thing where, first off, if it's not for the first session, if it's because they're getting into it, then more detail like that isn't something that I would, as a player, rebel against. And secondly, that's another good example of the sectional nature of the way that a player's guide can act as a reference. That if you're only working in particular sections to read it, then that's a lot easier to build the framework out than if you get an undifferentiated mass of material, which is also why I think Alex was saying, you know, to make sure you divide your sections and make them very clearly broken up.
Right. And if the Thieves' Cant document is more like a spell list, these are the things that you can communicate and these are the things that you can do, as opposed to this is a Tolkien-esque language construction.
Right.
Well, if you're both into Tolkien-esque language construction, then yay, great. You're hitting each other's expectations and your strengths. But if it's basically these are the things that thieves can do with the can't, then or that they can't do with can.
You wandered into that one and found yourself in the corner, didn't you?
I did. But the things that, you know, can and can't do with the can't. That's okay, right? Because that enables player agency, and that's always good.
Well, now that's a really good way of thinking about it too. Is that the stuff? If you're thinking to yourself that everything that you're writing is about enabling player agency, then that is actually kind of a good acid test for whether it ought to be there. Everyone just nods their head.
Yeah. Once again, I can't disagree.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, it's you know, in every group, that's the thing. Every group is going to be different, right? So we're going to lay down some generalities, and people are going to be, well, my group doesn't do that. Great, if it works for you, that's awesome, right? Every group is different. And you can even have the same 10, 5, 7, 8 people have totally different styles depending on what genre they're playing, right? Their expectations for a hack and slash fantasy game might be very different for an Ocean's 11 type campaign, right? And so if you can basically say, yeah, it's the real world, but here's who you are, then your player's guide is going to be all about stuff that's beyond the expectations and shared experience. If you're all playing furries in a made-up fantasy land, you're going to need to set people down a runway so that once they get to the end of the runway, they have control of their character and their direction. They don't just crash and burn.
This is
And
what
you
I
can
meant
achieve
about
liftoff.
This is what I meant about narwhals doing interpretive dance. If
Yeah,
the places that you end up, furries in an imaginary world is just not where you'd think when you start talking.
but it
Yeah.
wasn't Vikings this time.
No,
It
it wasn't.
I'm trying to branch out.
No, that's good. Furries. So, no, and I don't. That's one of the enchanting things about listening to you is that you just go.
That's why I rarely interrupt too. I mean, I just really want to see where things are going to go.
Yeah, it's what's that thing that they in the officer evaluations, the one about the lieutenant, where his men would follow him anywhere if just to see what's going to happen. Game Master's Vault's got a couple of other interesting thoughts here on his, and he clearly has a very, very complicated campaign world. He mentions, I thought he mentioned it somewhere that it was a complex one, but he mentions that he's got a video that he has people watch, and he also does one-on-one character-specific sessions, which is one of those are two different media that you can use to either avoid or fill in the gaps in a player's guide. I think a lot of people do a one-on-one session, about a character if there's any depth, and especially if you don't want the other players to, share knowledge about that.
Yeah.
What do you think about the idea of an 11-minute video? I think I would have trouble sitting through an 11-minute video.
Well, from my perspective, and I love the old school kind of flavor and doing things, but I love technology too. And so I think using technology in creative ways to get that stuff across is great. I don't know what this 11-minute video looks like. It might be really, professionally produced, or it could be just him sitting in front of the camera and talking. The latter would bore me. If this person is has some skill with making videos, it might be really entertaining. In which case,
it could be really awesome. I mean, I should say that I'm making the assumption it's just a person talking without any sort of flash. But I'm like anybody else. If you put flashy, colorful things in front of me, I'll continue to watch.
I mean, it's not really that hard to take even static images and using like Flash or whatever, kind of pan them across the screen and have a voiceover and maybe a soundtrack playing. That could be really entertaining and really engrossing. But yeah, it depends on how you do it and again, something Douglas said earlier, what your players expect.
Right.
So
honestly, I could easily watch 4 Kickstarter videos back to back, and a proper Kickstarter video was 2 or 3 minutes long. And here's 4 different pieces of this, and if it was, here's panning over the geography. I did that for Lost Hall of Tyr. My Kickstarter video had I had a map, and I scrolled the thing over the map, and here's a couple of pieces of artwork. And if you're doing it for your campaign, you can steal artwork because you're not publishing it, right? Here's a great clip from Star Wars, or here's a great clip from Lord of the Rings that shows monsters, and that immediately visually tells you the kind of thing that's going on. You take the scene from Blade Runner with the giant Atari building, and you know exactly what you're stepping into. So I could see it being pretty compelling. And done right. But again, right, if it's because we shouldn't say that watching people talk is inherently boring, since that might cause all these nice people to just say, "You're right," click.
Yeah, I was gonna say, is that what we're doing? Yeah. So
well, lost it right there. Oh, I was going to say, I've got it. Funnily enough, I was going to say I've got the attention span of a gnat. But I forgot what I was going to say. So, I mean, Frog God actually uses me to test Kickstarter videos, and they will ask, at what point did you quit watching? And, because I can't make it even through a 2 to 3 minute Kickstarter video. So I'll offer, Douglas, your next Kickstarter, if you want to test it out.
I actually got to reuse my Kickstarter video almost last time because it was an expansion of a previous one. So that I hate making those things. I like the end product, but boy, that's just not why I got into game design.
Yeah, and I see that he was talking about history and geography, in that question. I think that those are really good things to be brief about, if possible. You want to touch on some major points because people are going to have there's going to be stories. Characters are going to have been told stories about things that happen in history or creation myths or things like that. But you don't want to get into many pages of that because then it is you're reading a story instead of getting prepped for a game. And one of the things I noted about that as well is that one of the things I think is really important, especially when doing history and creation myths for your world, is you may tell your players things that are not actually true. I'm currently reading Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser.
Yay!
Yeah, I love them. Actually, I'm not reading them. I'm listening to them.
I assumed you were not reading them for the first time. That's it.
Yeah, but the world of Noan is they talk several times about it being a bubble floating in in a liquid rising through this liquid. Is that real? Is that true? Is that really how it works, or is that just the stories that have been told to people through generations? So you can put those kinds of things in your player's guide and get that in the minds of the players, and then thus into the characters. But it doesn't have to be true at all. They could discover later through adventuring that in some way that it's in fact not true. So,
and you raise an important issue there about players' guides too, because there is the temptation to tell people everything because you've worked a long time on having this stuff for them to discover. But if you tell it to them, they're not going to discover it later. You've just undone one of the really big goals, which is them discovering the mysteries behind things, them learning things along the way. And so, you do want to be careful also about, keep some of your cards in your hand, that you're not going to show them.
Right, and that expands too into that whole geography idea as well. It's great to have this whole big huge map, and maybe in your video you do a little flyover of the map or something, but do you really want the players to know all of that geography at the start? In some cases you may, in others, especially if you're starting them off doing a hex crawl, they might only know 60 miles from their hometown and any kind of real detail, and everything else is just kind of like, yeah, off to the west there's this and off to the right there's that, and it's very general and kind of amorphous in a way, and that could be something that you strive to achieve, is that lack of knowledge too, because you want them to discover as they travel. So
I absolutely agree with that, especially in fantasy worlds. Especially low magic fantasy worlds where the only way to experience something is to walk there or horse there or cart there or whatever. But you don't get, unless you live on the top of a mountain and are looking down and can see for 60 or 80 miles, you really don't get the satellite picture of the world.
Right.
And because we're a modern culture,
it's easy to forget.
It's easy to forget. It's really easy to forget.
We know what our world looks like from space.
Right.
Yeah.
It's flat. Never said it wasn't round. It's just kidding.
We've got one real good question out there that Rocky asked, which is how many points of interest is a good number in a player's guide? And I think that the answer to that probably depends a great deal on whether it's a DIY player's guide or a published one. Mm-hmm. So Rocky, let us know which one you're thinking about. I'm pretty sure you're talking about a DIY one, so we'll go ahead and talk about a published one, and then we'll get around to the DIY one. If you got anything you want to add to that question, but let's talk first about how many points of interest in a published player guide. What do you think, Douglas?
Well, I'm going to go back to what I was saying before. This kind of goes through my whole idea about this. So geography, you want to start, you want to start high level kind of overview, and your points of interest, whether they're the evil. We talked about this last time. The Black Forest, is it evil? That sort of thing. Only detail things that are unique, that really are have a story about them. If there's a mountain range that there's really nothing going on, just name it. You don't have to put any text to it, but put in those hooks, for lack of or for the term, probably the best term. Put those hooks in, and leave it at that. I think so, because again, that's an area where I think a lot of times DMs kind of just start writing paragraphs upon paragraphs upon paragraphs of things, and really, are the players going to ever discover all that? Just keep it to the unique points.
Hey, I'm getting praise over on the chat room. People saying I'm excellent as always.
There you go,
Douglas.
Yeah, I think that's right. It's a kind of a two-way answer. Never put more in your player's guide than you want the players to actually go, right? If you talk about the boring mountains of boringness and the Black Forest if nothing really happens here, and the perfectly cool lake where no one's ever died, and you have all that stuff there, people are going to say, well, my evil GM put that there, and they're calling it the boring mountain of boringness, but surely there must be something interesting there. And they may offer you a plot hook that you're like, yeah, that's better than what I wrote, so we'll go to the not so boring mountains of boringness. But, it is the player's guide is an opportunity to signal to your players what you've prepared. And if you see that They're like, oh, this sucks, then maybe you need to prepare a couple more points of interest. Yeah. But it's I think that's where it is if you want to throw down 562 different points of interest, you're going to give your players analysis paralysis unless 552 of them are out of physically out of reach, right? This is an interesting point, but you can't get there. So in which case, why would you throw it down in that first player's guide, right? Do it in the next player's guide, right? Give them supplemental information, or give them that point as a rumor when they get to the next town over. But it's your player's guide is your breadcrumbs, and you should use it that way.
No, I think that what we all did is we went over. I was saying we'll talk about it from the standpoint of a publisher. Everybody talked about doing it from the standpoint of the DIY. I know who my players are, so on and so forth. So let me carry on. And talk about DIY player handbooks, player guides as well. Part of it has to do with the process. And so one of the things that I jumped in mentally was when Douglas was saying that it's the breadcrumbs. It's giving them a signal as to what it is that you've prepared. And so in this way, you're looking at it, and this is always an exercise I try and do, is look at things. How does this impinge? How does this affect the adventure? If it's not about adventure, and if it's not about an adventure session, then it's probably extraneous. And so the thinking would be, okay, well, the player's guide that they're going to get right at the beginning for this campaign, what are the things that the points of interest are the things. What am I interested in this world? Try and distill down, leave out everything, but I would say 4 or 5 locations, places where you've got enough in your head that you can run the adventure there. And when you've got it distilled down, I would write the player's guide for the campaign around those adventure locations, because that's really where the rubber is going to hit the road, is in those adventure locations. What do you need to know to want to go there? What do you think you might get there? Things like that. And I think that everything that has to do with geography, at least at the very beginning, when you're handing them a player's guide, for the first time, rather than something that's a supplement, really drilling down, I think, to where do we really want this to go is probably one of your good rules for writing. It's very probably as good a rule as the one about enabling player agency.
Unless, of course, you have the type of players who see a plot hook and run screaming in the other direction.
Yeah, but they won't know where they're going.
As long as you know, as long as you know that, you can set up the false flag, right?
Right. No, I agree. Yeah.
But I mean, more seriously, right? If you throw out something with all of this extra geography that would have to require, it would require travel, but the adventure that you have prepared is a mega dungeon under the city that you're in right now, you've potentially caused yourself a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Dear God, don't give yourself, that much rope to bourbon. Don't give yourself so much rope to hand yourself by. Wonderful wife, she brings me bourbon. But if you're going to do all that stuff, but the area that you wanted to play in and that the players want to play in, oh, let's do a mega dungeon campaign. That hook better be mega dungeon arrow this way. And if you haven't informed them that you're running a mega dungeon and they go off somewhere else, then that's an expectation mismatch that should have been. I think it's Game Master Vault keeps mentioning Session 0, and he's absolutely right. Oh, I'm going to kind of do this, and if you haven't communicated that clearly, then you could be irritated with what they're doing, but you kind of brought that one on yourself, right? You didn't talk.
Right. No, I think it bears repeating that the expectations have to be kind of hashed out ahead of time, whether it's a session 0 or a series of group emails back and forth, or a online chat or something. You have to hash those things out well in advance, not before you potentially start building your setting, but before you get down to these kind of nitty-gritty details, you have to do that.
We had Rocky, and Rocky Gardner's he's a really good thinker on mega dungeons or mega dungeon theory, and he addressed Douglas's point about if you give them this information, but you were thinking they were going to go into the mega dungeon, then you've screwed yourself. And Rocky points out, what you would do in that situation, though, you can still give them information. Give them information about the points of interest in the mega dungeon.
Absolutely, and that is the rumor table 101, right? Here are all the rumors you can hear about, some true, some false, each of which is a breadcrumb.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of rumors, as we talked about before.
Which nobody has heard because it's scrambled. So let's jump over to that. Alex, talk to us about rumors and the benefits thereof.
Well, I think it's an important part of the player's guide, and every player's guide should probably have a section on rumors. What you want to do there is give them some ideas of what the characters could possibly know about the world, or can easily find out, by going to some local sages or hearing conversations in a tavern or so forth. Things about whether where you want them to go, and given different types of campaigns, these different things would be some of those, with the locations of humanoid tribes and their activities and things that they're where they're raiding and so forth, dungeon sites, or, as Douglas said, points of interest within a mega dungeon, potentially close to the city or under the city. And also, you can throw things in there too about like ancient evils and things that you eventually want them to get to. But you have to, if you start with something like that, like an ancient evil that might be like kind of an end game, big bad kind of type of guy. What you want to do is you want to start with those rumors being very general, very non-specific, so that there is a lot of work that needs to be done to develop those into something actionable. And one thing to always remember too, I think is very important. You see this in things like Keep on the Borderlands and so forth. Rumors are not always true. Sometimes they have a grain of truth. Sometimes they're completely made up. And you want to put those kinds of things in there because you don't always, especially when you want rumors to be developed over a course of time. You don't want them to become actionable right away. So you want the players to sift through what's true and what's not. And if they can figure out what is true, then they have to follow that thread or that string to greater detail.
And you know what was an interesting inversion of that trope is the old Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, where I believe in the first 5 seconds of the first episode they meet Tiamat. Right? I mean, it's just like here's the big bad Venger, here's Tiamat, and they don't like each other much. And be careful, or else these guys with these priceless artifacts are going to get squashed like bugs. But don't worry, the dungeon master will protect you. But that was sort of the invert of that. Is like, we're going to show you the big bad in the first 10 seconds, and every now and then they're going to show up to make your life hard, but you're not ready for this. And that's actually one of the, I think, the hard things that I think you alluded to is you're not ready for this, but here's a, because what the big danger is, you're like, oh, well, the game master certainly wouldn't, and you guys probably don't deal with this because you're old school, but, oh, the game master certainly wouldn't dangle something in front of us that we weren't supposed to chase.
Right.
Oh, yes, we would.
Yeah.
I always tell this to people, in a discussion with Ernie Gygax, one of the things he said to me, and I always keep this in mind, when we came across a challenge that we couldn't face, we either looked for a way around it or came back to it later when we gained experience and or the proper items to deal with the challenge. I think that's something that's been lost potentially in newer games. To your point, the dungeon master would never put anything in my way that I can't somehow deal with. In the old school style of gaming, that's not at all true. You'll end up dead.
we had a big conversation as we were playtesting Hall of Judgment, which is the GURPS Dungeon Fantasy role-playing game adventure that I just published, because we actually managed to create, and it's hard to do in GURPSy games, we actually managed to create a monster that could take a party of 5 or 6 people and crush them if they didn't approach it right. And so there's a section of the adventure called Overwhelmed, which is what happens if they just Leroy Jenkins their way into it without thinking about how do we take on a giant evil under these circumstances? What do we know? What tactics we should do? Because the first playtest was a curb stomp. They went after this monster and they didn't do any thinking about how to tackle it. And they're like, hey, that was an unfair encounter. And we're like, yeah, you had a nice magical barrier protecting you from the demon, and you ignored it totally and ran onto his home turf. You got every bit of what you deserved.
Yeah.
But bringing it back to the rumors and stuff, it's really just a matter of it's a great way of seeding information. It's also a great way of providing little things to do if you want people to get to know the world. We talked a lot about, in the one that was lost, we talked a little bit about festivals. But either, odd jobs, rumors, and festivals are all great ways for the player characters to get to know the world one-on-one by interacting with the people in it in the way that is sort of native to the environment, which is really important if you're either dealing with like a bunch of people who are never traveled outside of New Jersey going to Thailand. It doesn't even have to be crazy fantasy sword and sorcery stuff, or say David Pulver's brilliant but mind-bogglingly deep transhuman space, which I've always found amazing but incredibly hard to approach because it's so foreign to existence as understand it. You've got uploaded consciousnesses and different political factions, and hard to assimilate in IT frameworks and whatever.
Okay,
it was so hard to get into. Sorry, go ahead.
What's the title and the author here?
Oh, David Pulver, Big Eyes, Small Mouth. He wrote GURPS Vehicles, a lot of other stuff, called Transhuman Space.
Okay.
It was.
Douglas, I'm going to interrupt you for a minute too, and just say one of the things I found most interesting about this part of the conversation last time was when you were talking about the frequency of festivals, and that I don't think a lot of people know that, and I think that's important to point out.
Sure. Yeah, just real quick. One of the things I found out while I was researching medieval towns and stuff is on the average there was some kind of hoedown about every 6 days, and at least once a month, usually twice, there was something major. And for Hall of Judgment, I wrote 23 festivals, each of which had a couple lines of text describing what players coming into town on any given month might experience, because I was playtesting an entirely different thing, and came up with the festival idea. And it was so awesome because the players immediately engaged. Like one of them was like, "Oh, I'm going to wrestle the wrestling champion." The other was like, "Oh, I want to do an archery contest. Oh, I'm going to get into a drinking competition with this guy. Oh, I don't like the look of this guy." And it was beautiful because you could put to the test all of the kinds of interactions that you can have. You can use these boxing or wrestling or quarterstaff competitions, which were all over the place in these in medieval stuff. Everyone competed and bet on everything, and you could do all this stuff in a way that wasn't going to get your face eaten. You might lose face, but you probably wouldn't get killed. Or if the culture you're going into is really big on noble death in the arena, you could have them watch that and you can bet on it rather than have a total party kill before you even engage the adventure. I find that kind of thing where you're walking into a dynamic world and you've got all of these things for things to do. I'm going to have to avoid making it trite and being that in everything that I ever publish, because I like it so much that I need to not overdo it. But it was just really cool. It was a great way of interacting with the culture.
Everybody loves when you've got little games that their characters can play. Things like, whether it's a slot machine, or whatever it is, people, you can always rely on that if you've got a couple of those little games written down some way.
Yeah.
So Jim Havoc is writing, a great way to highlight a player's niche is unarmed combat, etc. Also a good place for fortune tellers. That's a really good point. Anywhere that you can put a credible fortune teller, or at least one who might be believable, fortune tellers are wonderful because they'll send characters herring off in all kinds of different directions. And that's one of the things that I mentioned in the player guide I'm writing right now is an oracle.
Yeah, one of the
information.
One of my favorite DMing experiences was running the original Ravenloft for first edition, and the whole plot is kind of centers around a card reading. Mm-hmm. What is the item you're looking for? Where is Strahd located? All that stuff is foretold by a card reading, and it really creeped us out in a way that it added kind of a feeling of actual fate and doom to the adventure that I've not experienced since or even before that. I think it's really powerful, a very powerful thing to do.
And the other cool thing about it, because we're not allowed to disagree with each other yet, but the other nifty thing about it is you get to say, oh, well, and I was just rewatching or rereading the Jim Butcher stuff, right? Oh, I'm the only practicing wizard in Chicago. Oh, you're the crank. Oh, I'm the fortune teller. Oh, we must consult the oracles. Actually, I was watching 300, right? We are not going to go to war unless the E4s say so. Well, there's something where either they have so much political power that whatever they say goes, or they actually have an honest-to-God channel to the future, in which case you take them very seriously. And how people are going to react to an oracular statement is going to inform the players by show don't tell. That's going to inform the players about the culture and the environment that they're in way better than writing down, oh, oracles are right. I mean, they get to experience it, right?
Right. Yeah, I think
Go ahead, Alex.
I was just say, I just think that brings up another point about like ethnic groups and so forth for the player's guide. I think a lot of people tend to just have a big homogenous group, in their campaigns. Sometimes you see that in professional stuff too, which I don't really understand. But you know, you want to detail some ethnic groups, and you want to talk about where they came from. You know, whether it's somewhere else on the world, or if they came from another plane or something like that. And they may have different myths and history than the general kind of common populace of the area. Especially when you have a displaced population. I talking about card reading and so forth. I think of you know, like gypsies and that sort of thing, Romani. You know, they're going to be mixed in with a population potentially, but have very different outlooks and views on things, and really different and rich myths and culture to explore. And that's something that you want to let your players know about. They may either want to find that they want to interact with them, or they may want their characters to be a part of that group. And so I think that's pretty important. One
of the things that I like about the master of that is Jack Vance, and it's actually it's not so much in his fantasy writing, although I think maybe there is in the Cuja Le Clever bits. But when you read his science fiction, it's just this one after another, these wonderful little gems of culture where things make sense internally but look absolutely ridiculous to the outsider. A lot of cynicism in Vance's science fiction about what culture and ethnicity is. All right. Well, does that bring us to the point where we're starting to wrap up? Anybody have any closing thoughts on the whole thing? We're going to have to find something we disagree about, guys.
Yeah. Get some fireworks going.
Yeah. All right. Well, we'll work on that behind the scenes. Everybody who's watching. Now, Jason just asked, how would we work a fortune teller into a player's guide? Yeah. What I would do is probably like either the Oracle of Delphi, or in the rumors table that somebody had said it. But I think generally it's you want to point somebody to the information source so that you can show, don't tell. Generally.
Yeah,
so,
I wouldn't necessarily put in an NPC or something like that this person, but you know, you kind of culturally talk about that it's accepted and generally viewed as a real phenomenon. Maybe you know, give a specific ethnic group or race that deals in that specifically. Yeah, but I wouldn't go too deep into specifics. Leave it kind of high level initially.
I actually think that working prophecy and fate into that actually have bite into a game is probably one of the most difficult things in interactive storytelling. If I'm writing a book, I can make a prophecy and then I write the answer. If I'm doing interactive stuff, I got no control over what the players do. Right? That's actually worthy of a topic in and of itself. Is how to do that. Good ways, bad ways.
Yeah, and I think that the important thing to do there is we talked in the first time through about sandbox, and I'm not a real big believer that there's true sandbox, but this is one of those instances where I think it's really important that you kind of come into it with that kind of a mindset, is that if you're going to put prophecy into your game, I think it's very important to listen to what the players say as they're hearing the prophecy and take notes. And that's what the prophecy becomes. Is, you know, you can kind of play around with meaning and the words that they use and kind of flipping things around a little bit and putting twists on it, but take that, be a sounding board to what they're saying, and turn that around for them. That's the easiest way of doing it. If you have this grand plan and you're going to try to, you know, put it in there with a prophecy and foist it upon the players, it's going to get all screwed up. It's not.
Yeah, you're going to end up with a poor game as a result of just trying to do that shoehorning.
Right.
Okay, well, we'll leave it there for this evening, and we will work on figuring out something that we disagree about. And once we do that, I will bring the two of you guys back and we'll disagree about stuff. But for tonight, Alex, go ahead and say goodbye to your fans.
Hey, goodbye, everybody. It's nice seeing you.
Douglas, we've had a lot of people watching the show.
Bye-bye, fan.
That's Douglas's usual closing line. I will go ahead and do my usual closing line, which is no matter what kind of D&D it is that you play, imagine the hell out of it.